Part 1. The drifting wreckage. Jake Morrison stared at the cracked viewport of his escape pod, watching the stars drift past in the endless black of space. His ship was gone, destroyed 3 days ago in an ambush he never saw coming. And now he floated alone with nothing but emergency rations and a distress beacon that might never be answered. The cargo vessel Frontier Dawn had been carrying mining equipment to the outer colonies. When the attack happened, Jake remembered the sudden flash of weapons fire, the screaming of metal as the hull tore apart, and his desperate sprint to the escape pods while the ship died around him. He was a freight officer, not a soldier, but survival instincts took over when death came knocking. Checked his supplies again for the 100th time. 3 days of water, 5 days of nutrient paste, 1 emergency medical kit, and a single pressure suit. The pod's communication system was damaged in the ejection, leaving only the automatic distress beacon functioning on a loop, calling out to anyone who might be listening in the vast emptiness. Jake had worked the frontier routes for 8 years since leaving Earth. He knew the dangers of space travel, knew that pirates and raiders operated in the neutral zones. But humanity was still new to the galactic community, and their ships were often targeted by those who saw them as easy prey. His thoughts drifted to his sister Kate back on Earth. She had begged him not to take the frontier routes, told him to stay in the safer core systems where human patrols operated. But Jake always loved the adventure of the unknown, loved seeing new worlds and meeting alien species. Now that love might cost him his life, the pod suddenly shuddered and Jake's heart raced. Something had grabbed him with a tractor beam, pulling the small craft toward an unseen ship. Hope surged through him. Maybe a rescue vessel had found him. Maybe humanity's new allies in the Galactic Council had responded to his beacon. But as his pod entered the cargo bay of the massive ship, Jake saw the reptilian figures waiting for him, and his hope turned to ice. These were not friends, not rescuers. These were Vacrine warriors, and their reputation throughout the galaxy was one of violence and cruelty. The airlock hissed open and 4 Vacrine soldiers entered. They stood over 7 feet tall with scales like dark green armor and eyes that reflected the harsh lights. Their clawed hands grabbed Jake roughly and pulled him from the pod, handling him like a piece of cargo rather than a living being. Commander Threx entered the cargo bay, his scales darker than the others and marked with scars from countless battles. He looked at Jake with something between curiosity and contempt, examining the human like a scientist might examine an insect. A human, Threx said in his own language, which Jake's translator implant converted to English. We have heard of your kind, soft creatures from a weak world. You will provide entertainment for my crew. Jake said nothing, keeping his face neutral despite the fear climbing up his spine. He had heard stories about the Vacrine from other traders, heard about their proving hunts where they released captured beings on dangerous worlds and hunted them for spore. Threx circled Jake slowly, his clawed feet clicking on the metal floor. Your species joined the galactic community only 5 of your years ago, he continued. You have no warrior tradition, no claws, no natural armor. Your homeworld is a gentle place that made you weak. The other Vacrine warriors laughed at this, a harsh hissing sound that made Jake's skin crawl. They didn't know anything about humanity, didn't know that Earth was far from gentle, didn't know what humans were capable of when their survival was on the line. Take him to processing, Threx ordered. Prepare him for the hunt. We will drop him on Krell 9. That world will test if humans have any strength at all. The soldiers dragged Jake through the ship's corridors. The vessel was a warship, cold and efficient, with no decoration or comfort, built only for violence and conquest. Other crew members stopped to stare at the human prisoner, their reptilian faces showing amusement and anticipation in the processing room. They stripped Jake of everything except his basic clothing, his communicator, his emergency beacon, his medical kit. all taken away and tossed into a disposal unit. They gave him a survival knife, a water purifier, and a pack with basic supplies, the bare minimum to make the hunt sporting, as Threx called Ida. Vacrine technician approached with a device that Jake recognized as a translator chip. They injected it directly into his neck, updating his implant with Vacrine language protocols. "So you can understand your hunters when they find you," the technician said with a cruel smile. Jake was thrown into a holding cell for the night. The room was small and dark, with only a thin mat on the floor. Through the small window he could see stars passing by as the ship traveled toward whatever death world they had chosen for him. Sat against the wall and forced himself to think clearly. Panic would kill him faster than any predator. He needed to assess what he knew and what advantages he might have. The Vacrine thought humans were weak because they didn't understand what weakness truly meant. Had forged humanity through ice ages and plagues, through predators that hunted humans and disasters that destroyed civilizations. Humans survived because they adapted, because they thought creatively, because they never gave up even when extinction seemed certain. Jake had grown up on the colony world of New Montana, a harsh frontier planet where the wildlife was aggressive and the weather could kill in minutes. His father had taught him tracking and survival, taught him that the brain was humanity's greatest weapon. Not strength or speed, but the ability to think and plan. The Vacrine were physically superior. That was obvious, but they were arrogant. They underestimated their prey, and that arrogance could be exploited. If Jake could survive long enough to learn their patterns, to understand their tactics, he might find a way to turn the hunt around. Sleep came in fits that night. Jake dreamed of Earth's forests where his father had trained him. Dreamed of Kate's face when she learned he was dead. But he also dreamed of victory, of surviving when everyone expected him to die, of proving that humanity was stronger than the galaxy believed. Morning came with the harsh sound of the cell door opening. 2 guards entered and grabbed Jake, pulling him to his feet and marching him toward the drop bay. Other crew members lined the corridors to watch, placing bets on how long the human would survive. Most gave him less than a day. Commander Threx waited at the dropship, his arms crossed over his scaled chest. "You have 6 hours head start," he announced. "Use that time wisely. My best hunters will be tracking you, and they have never lost prey on Krell-9." Jake was shoved into the dropship along with his meager supplies. Through the viewport, he could see the planet below. A world of green and purple vegetation with massive storm systems swirling across the surface. It looked deadly and hostile, exactly what the Vacrine intended as the dropship descended through the atmosphere. Jake felt an unexpected calm settle over him. Fear was still there, lurking in his chest. But alongside it was something else, something that humans carried in their DNA from a million years of survival. The stubborn refusal to be prey. The ship landed in a clearing surrounded by dense jungle. The door opened and toxic air rushed in, breathable but thick with spores and pollen. Jake grabbed his pack and knife and stepped out onto the alien soil. The dropship lifted off immediately. Leaving him alone, he looked around at the towering trees and strange plants. Heard the sounds of unseen creatures moving through the undergrowth. 6 hours until the hunters came. 6 hours to prepare. 6 hours to become something the Vacrine had never encountered before. Jake Morrison had been many things in his life. Freight officer, colonial scout, survivor of the harsh frontier worlds. Now he would become something new, not prey running from hunters, but a human fighting back with every trick and advantage that evolution had given his species. The hunt was about to begin. But the Vacrine didn't realize they had made a fatal mistake. They thought they were hunting a weak creature from a gentle world. They would learn too late that humans came from a planet that tested every generation. And those who survived became the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. Part 2. The hunter becomes the hunted. Jake moved through the alien jungle with careful steps, his eyes scanning everything around him while his mind cataloged every detail. The purple vegetation released spores when disturbed. The ground was soft and muddy in some areas, but rocky in others. And the sounds of the forest told him where the dangerous creatures were hiding. Had 4 hours left before the Vacrine hunters would be released. 4 hours to prepare a defense, to create advantages, to turn this death world into his ally instead of his enemy. His father's voice echoed in his memory. The environment is never your enemy, son. Only your ignorance of it. The first task was finding water. Jake followed the sound of running liquid until he found a stream with clearish water flowing over smooth stones. He tested it with the purifier and found it safe to drink. This would be his first landmark. His first point of reference in this hostile wilderness. Next came shelter, but not the kind most people would build. Jake didn't want a permanent base that could be found and surrounded. Instead, he needed multiple positions, places he could retreat to and ambush from. Places that gave him options and mobility. He found a rocky outcropping that overlooked a natural path through the jungle. The rocks formed a small cave that was hidden by hanging vines, perfect for observation and defense. Jake cleared the inside carefully and set up his first supply cache. Dividing his meager resources between multiple locations, time was his enemy now. 3 hours remained, and he still needed to prepare his first trap. The Vacrine were warriors who relied on strength and advanced weapons. But Jake had learned on the frontier colonies that technology could be defeated by simple mechanics and basic physics. He found strong vines hanging from the massive trees. Testing them carefully, he discovered they were incredibly tough and flexible. Perfect for what he needed, Jake cut several long sections and began constructing a snare trap across the path below his rocky outcropping. Trap was simple but effective. A loop of vine hidden under fallen leaves, connected to a bent sapling that would spring up when triggered. It wouldn't kill a Vacrine warrior, but it would disable them long enough for Jake to act. He made 3 more variations along different paths, each one carefully disguised. With 1 hour remaining, Jake focused on weapons. His survival knife was good, but he needed range and options. He fashioned the spear from a straight branch, hardening the point with friction against rocks. Then created several throwing sticks that could be used as projectiles. The jungle provided other resources too. Some plants oozed a sticky sap that Jake recognized as potentially toxic based on how insects avoided it. He carefully collected some on leaves, creating a primitive poison that could coat his weapons. Testing was impossible, but desperation made you take risks. Jake climbed a tree to get a better view of the terrain. From this height, he could see the layout of the land, the paths the predators used, the areas where the vegetation was too thick for easy movement. Knowledge was power, and he was gathering as much as he could. The sound of a ship approaching made his heart race. The Vacrine dropship was returning with the hunters. Jake counted at least 6 warriors emerging from the vessel, all heavily armed with energy weapons and scanning equipment. Commander Threx was among them, directing his soldiers with military precision. The human will run like all prey runs. Threx's voice carried through the jungle, Jake's translator implant picking up the words. We will track him and end this quickly. Spread out in pairs and report any signs. Jake watched from his hidden position as the hunters split into 3 teams. They moved with confidence, scanning the ground for tracks, their reptilian faces showing amusement rather than concern. They expected an easy hunt. Expected Jake to be hiding in fear somewhere. The first team moved directly toward the path where Jake had set his primary trap. The 2 warriors walked side by side, their weapons ready but their posture relaxed. They talked casually about how they would claim the human survival knife as a trophy. Jake held his breath as they approached the hidden snare. The lead hunter, a Vacrine named Krax, according to their conversation, stepped directly into the trigger zone. The vine snapped up with tremendous force. catching Krax's leg and flipping him upside down into the air. His partner turned in shock, but Jake was already moving. He dropped from his position in the rocks with his spear leading. The hardened point drove into the second hunter's shoulder joint where the armor was weakest. Not fatal, but enough to disable the arm, holding the weapon. Krax hung upside down, screaming commands into his communicator while trying to cut himself free. Jake grabbed both energy weapons and disappeared back into the jungle before reinforcements could arrive. The hunt had lasted less than 20 minutes, and already the Valkyrie had lost 2 hunters, and their weapons commander Threx's voice exploded over the communication channels. All teams converge on Krax's position. The human is armed now. Increase caution level. But Jake was already 200 meters away, moving through areas where the undergrowth was thickest, where his smaller size was an advantage over the larger Valkyrie warriors. He could hear them crashing through the jungle behind him, trying to follow his trail. He doubled back using a technique his father taught him, walking backward in his own footprints, then leaping to a different path. The Valkyrie trackers followed the false trail, while Jake circled around behind them. He was no longer running, he was hunting. The second trap claimed another victim that afternoon. Jake had rigged a deadfall using heavy rocks balanced above a narrow passage. When 2 hunters squeezed through the gap, Jake cut the support vine and sent the rocks crashing down. One warrior was knocked unconscious. The other, trapped under the weight, Jake didn't engage this time. He simply took their weapons and supplies, then vanished again. He was building an arsenal, and the Valkyrie were providing it. Each encounter taught him more about their tactics, their weaknesses. Their growing frustration. Night fell on Krellmine, and the temperature dropped sharply. Jake had prepared for this by finding a thermal vent near one of his cache locations. The warm air rising from underground kept the area comfortable, while the Valkyrie hunters suffered in the cold. Their reptilian biology making them sluggish. Commander Threx ordered his remaining hunters to make camp. They built a fire and posted guards, but their confidence was shattered. They had come to hunt prey, but found themselves being picked apart by an enemy they couldn't catch. Jake watched from a tree above their camp, studying their routine and guard rotation. He saw how they treated the wounded hunters with medical equipment far superior to anything humans had. Saw how they checked their weapons and discussed new tactics. Threx addressed his soldiers. This human is not what we expected. He fights like a predator, not prey, but he is still alone, and we have numbers. Tomorrow we end this. But Jake smiled in the darkness because he understood something the Valkyrie didn't. Humans weren't the strongest or fastest species, weren't the most naturally armed or armored. What made humans dangerous was their ability to learn and adapt, to use their environment as a weapon, to never stop fighting. He spent the night preparing his next series of traps. Using the energy weapons he'd captured, Jake created tripwires connected to their triggers, set to discharge when the Valkyrie passed certain points. He also found the territories of the local predators and learned how to drive them toward his enemies. Dawn came with Threx, dividing his hunters into a single group for safety. They would move together and overwhelm the human with firepower. But this played into Jake's strategy because a large group was easier to track and predict. Jake led them on a chase through the most dangerous parts of the jungle. He left obvious signs of his passage, drawing them toward areas where he'd set up overlapping ambushes. Where the terrain favored defense over attack, the Valkyrie followed cautiously, but their pride drove them forward. They couldn't accept that a single human was defeating trained warriors. Their military doctrine didn't account for an enemy who fought with such creativity and ruthlessness. When they entered a narrow canyon, Jake triggered his prepared defenses. Energy blasts fired from hidden positions, forcing the Valkyrie to scatter. Then the local predators he'd been baiting arrived. Massive 6-legged creatures with razor-sharp claws that saw the Valkyrie as invaders. In the chaos, Jake moved like a ghost. He targeted their communication equipment with precise shots, isolating soldiers from their commander, then used his mobility to strike and fade before they could respond by midday. Commander Threx had only 3 hunters left combat-ready. The rest were wounded, exhausted, or dead from the planet's predators. He looked at the humans' tracks with new understanding. With fear replacing his earlier contempt, Jake Morrison stood on a cliff overlooking the Vacrine position. He was tired and hungry, covered in mud and minor wounds, but he was alive and he was winning. The prey had become the predator, and the galaxy was about to learn what that meant. Part 3. The Death World's lesson. Commander Threx stood in his ship's command center watching the tactical display with disbelief. 6 days had passed since they dropped the human on Krell 9, and 15 of his warriors were either dead or too wounded to fight. He had called for reinforcements because pride no longer mattered. Only Survival Captain Vorn arrived with 20 elite soldiers from the Vacrine Imperial Guard. These were not regular hunters, but professional military operatives trained in asymmetric warfare and hostile environment combat. Vorn looked at Threx with barely concealed contempt when he heard that a single human had caused such losses. "Your failure embarrasses our entire species," Vorn said coldly as his troops prepared their equipment. "I will show you how true warriors hunt." But Threx grabbed Vorn's arm before he could leave. "Don't underestimate him. This human is not like the prey species we've encountered before. He thinks and adapts like nothing I've seen." Vorn pulled his arm free. "He's one creature against 20 of our best soldiers. This will be over by nightfall." The elite troops deployed to Krell 9 with advanced scanning equipment, better armor, and weapons designed to penetrate any cover. They moved in coordinated teams with overlapping fields of fire, using military tactics refined over centuries of Vacrine warfare. Jake watched the new arrivals from his network of observation posts. He'd spent the last 6 days expanding his territory, learning every path and danger zone, building relationships with the planet's ecosystem in ways the Vacrine couldn't imagine. Had discovered caves that connected through underground passages, giving him mobility that couldn't be tracked from above. He'd mapped the territories of every major predator and learned their behaviors, their feeding times, their aggression triggers. Most importantly, Jake had made an unexpected alliance. While exploring a marshy area, he'd found a pack of local creatures trapped in a bog. They looked like wolves, but with 6 legs and crystalline eyes that glowed in the dark. One of their young was stuck and drowning. Jake could have ignored them, but his humanity wouldn't allow it. He'd spent an hour carefully extracting the young creature from the bog, risking his own safety to save something that couldn't thank him. The pack watched, and when their young was free, they didn't attack the creatures, which Jake called Skrulls based on the sound they made, began following him. At first he thought they might be waiting to attack, but they brought him food, showed him safe paths, and warned him when danger approached. Somehow they understood he was different from the Vacrine invaders. Captain Vorn's forces spread across the jungle in a military sweep pattern. They used drones to scout ahead and chemical markers to track any movement. Their technology was impressive, and Jake knew his old tactics wouldn't work against these professionals. But Jake had learned something crucial during his time on Krell 9. Technology had weaknesses, and the planet itself could be weaponized. The Vacrine relied on their scanners and equipment, which meant they didn't develop the natural awareness that kept you alive on a death. The first elite team encountered what they thought was an easy target. Jake had left obvious tracks leading to a small cave, the kind of hiding place a desperate human might use. 4 soldiers approached with weapons ready, their confidence high. What they didn't know was that the cave connected to a Skrull den. Jake had led the pack there earlier, and they were protecting their young. When the Vacrine entered with weapons active, the Skrulls interpreted it as a threat and attacked with savage ferocity. The screams brought reinforcements running, but Jake had prepared for that too. He'd scattered the toxic plant sap he'd discovered along their approach routes. The Vakrine's sensitive skin absorbed the poison through contact, causing paralysis and respiratory problems. Captain Vorn realized too late that they weren't fighting just a human. They were fighting the entire ecosystem under his coordination. "He's turned the planet against us," Vorn reported to his ship. "Request immediate air support." But air support couldn't navigate the dense canopy and the storm systems that constantly raged across Krell-9. The Vakrine technology that worked on controlled battlefields failed in the chaos of a true death world. Jake moved through the jungle with his boys, Skrull Pack flanking him. He'd learned their communication sounds, and they responded to his tactical signals. Together, they were a coordinated hunting unit that struck fast and disappeared before the Vakrine could respond. Night brought new horrors for the elite troops. Krell-9's nocturnal predators were even more dangerous than the daytime creatures, and Jake knew how to draw them to Vakrine positions, using scent markers and sound calls, one by one. Vorn's soldiers fell to ambush, traps, and predator attacks. They tried to adapt, but Jake adapted faster. Every tactic they used, he found a counter for. Every position they fortified, he found a way to breach. The turning point came on the 8th day when Jake captured a Vakrine communication hub. It was a small automated station they'd set up to coordinate their forces. He didn't destroy it. Instead, he learned how to use it with access to their communications. Jake could hear their plans, their positions, their fears. He started sending false signals that split their forces apart, directed them into danger zones, made them doubt their own intelligence. Captain Vorn's confidence shattered completely when he found one of his teams had been led into a territory belonging to Krell-9's apex predator. The creature was massive, 30 feet long with armored plates and electromagnetic sensing organs. It killed 4 soldiers before the survivors could escape. "Withdrawal," Vorn finally ordered, his voice hollow with defeat. "All units return to the extraction point. We're leaving this planet." But Jake wasn't done teaching them lessons. As the Vakrine retreated, he and the Skrulls harried them constantly, making them fight for every meter, showing them what it meant to be prey running from a predator only. 8 of Vorn's 20 elite soldiers made it back to the dropships. The rest were casualties of war against an enemy they'd dismissed as weak. Vorn himself was wounded, his armor cracked, and his pride destroyed. As the ships lifted off, Jake stood at the edge of the clearing with the Skrull Pack around him. He was exhausted and scarred, but very much alive, and he'd proven something that would echo across the galaxy. Commander Threx watched from orbit as Vorn's forces fled. "I warned you," was all he said, but inside he felt a new emotion toward humans. Something the Vakrine rarely experienced, respect mixed with fear. The Galactic Council received reports of the disaster within hours. Ambassador Lisa Crane from Earth read them with growing satisfaction. The galaxy had dismissed humanity as a newcomer species, too soft and too weak to matter in galactic politics. Now they had proof that humans were descendants of apex predators from a planet that made Krell-9 look gentle. Earth had forged humanity through millions of years of survival against extinction events, ice ages, plagues, and natural disasters that would have wiped out most species. Lisa used the opportunity to push for new treaties and recognition. She presented videos from Krell-9 showing Jake's tactics, his adaptation, his refusal to give up. The council members watched in silence as one human defeated dozens of trained Vakrine warriors. Some species argued that humans should be restricted as too dangerous. Others wanted to recruit humanity as military allies. But Lisa argued for something better. Recognize humans as equals and never make the mistake of underestimating them again. On Krell-9, Jake continued to survive. He'd built a permanent shelter in the caves, established gardens using seeds from edible plants, and created a water collection system. The Skrulls lived with him as pack members, helping him hunt and defend his territory. He didn't know if rescue would ever come, but he kept fighting to survive because that's what humans did. They endured, they adapted, they conquered environments that should have killed them. From the African savanna, where they evolved, to the frozen poles, to the depths of space. 47 days after being dropped on the death world, Jake stood at the highest point he'd found and looked at the stars. Somewhere up there was Earth, his home, his sister Kate, and a species that was just beginning to show the galaxy what they were capable of. The Vacrine had tried to hunt him for sport, tried to prove that humans were weak prey species not worthy of respect. Instead, they'd created a legend that would spread through every star system. A story about the human who turned a death sentence into a military campaign. Jake Morrison didn't feel like a legend. He felt tired and homesick and ready to return to civilization, but he also felt something else. Something primal and ancient that came from his evolutionary heritage. He felt like what he was. A human being, a member of the species that climbed out of the trees, survived the predators, conquered the planet, and reached for the stars. A species that never gave up, never surrendered, never accepted defeat. The hunt had ended, but not the way the Vacrine expected. The prey had become the ultimate predator, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. Part 4. The Galactic Revelation Ambassador Lisa Crane stood before the Galactic Council with confidence that hadn't existed 3 months ago. Humanity had always been the newest species at the table, dismissed by civilizations that had traveled the stars for thousands of years. But everything had changed because of one man's survival. The council chamber was massive, filled with representatives from 47 different species. Some were humanoid, others were radically alien in form. All of them had come to hear testimony about the Krell 9 incident and what it meant for humanity's place in the galaxy. The Vacrine Empire stands accused of violating the Treaty of Sentient Rights, announced Counselor Drex, a being made of crystalline structures that communicated through light patterns. They captured a human citizen and subjected him to what they call a proving hunt. This is forbidden under galactic law. Commander Threx stood in the center of the chamber, his scales duller than before and his posture showing defeat. Beside him was Captain Vorn, still recovering from wounds received on Krell 9. Both warriors looked diminished, shadows of the proud soldiers who had underestimated Jake Morrison. We acknowledge the violation, Threx said quietly, but we also request that the Council understand our perspective. Humans were classified in our database as a prey species. We had no indication they were capable of such combat effectiveness. Lisa allowed herself a small smile before responding. That's because your database was wrong. Humanity is not and has never been a prey species. We are apex predators from a planet that makes most of your death worlds look like vacation resorts. She activated the holographic display and images of Earth filled the chamber. Massive storms that dwarfed anything on Krell 9, earthquakes that could level cities, predators ranging from microscopic viruses to multi-ton carnivores. The council members shifted uncomfortably as they realized what they were seeing. Earth has an extinction rate of 99%. Lisa continued. That means 99% of all species that ever lived on our planet are now extinct, and humans survived. We didn't survive by being strong or fast or having natural weapons. The display changed to show human evolution. Early humans running down prey through persistence hunting. Humans surviving ice ages that killed megafauna. Humans developing tools in fire and agriculture. The progression from primitive survivors to spacefaring civilization. We survived because we adapt, Lisa said, her voice carrying through the chamber. We use our environment as a weapon. We learn from every encounter. We never give up even when death seems certain. These traits are coded into our DNA through 4 million years of evolution. Counselor Vex, an insectoid being from a hive species, clicked their mandibles in what translated as skepticism. One individual's survival doesn't prove an entire species is dangerous. Perhaps this Jake Morrison is exceptional among humans. Lisa had prepared for this argument. She pulled up military records from Earth's history, showing countless examples of humans surviving impossible odds, winning battles against superior forces, adapting to environments that should have killed them. Humans have survived nuclear warfare, biological plagues, climate disasters, and our own tendency towards self-destruction, she said. Jake Morrison isn't exceptional, he's typical. Every human has this capacity for survival because those who didn't have it died out. Millions of years ago, the display shifted to show real-time footage from Krell 9. The Vacrine had been forced to provide all their tactical recordings as part of the investigation. The council watched in silence as Jake turned their hunt into a counter-offensive. They saw him build traps from nothing, saw him ally with the local predators, saw him learn Vacrine technology and turn it against them. Most importantly, they saw him refuse to give up even when surrounded by superior forces. This human had no military training. Captain Vorn testified reluctantly. He was a freight officer, a civilian, yet he defeated 40 trained Vacrine warriors using only primitive tools and environmental knowledge. Ambassador Krell, a tentacled being from an aquatic world, asked the question many were thinking. If one civilian human can do this, what could their military forces accomplish? Should we be concerned about human expansion into our territories? Lisa saw the fear beginning to spread and knew she had to address it carefully. Humanity doesn't want conquest. We want partnership. We want to trade, explore, and coexist with other species peacefully. But we also want respect. She gestured to the Vacrine representatives. These warriors assumed humans were prey because we're relatively new to space travel. They learned a very expensive lesson about making assumptions. We're asking the Council to ensure no other species makes the same mistake. Councilor Drex's lights flickered in a pattern that indicated consideration. What exactly is humanity requesting from this council? 3 things. Lisa said, holding up fingers for emphasis. First, full voting rights and recognition as a Tier 1 civilization. Second, immediate prosecution of any species that attempts to hunt or enslave human citizens. Third, access to restricted trade routes and technology sharing agreements. The chamber erupted in debate. Some species supported humanity's requests. Others feared that giving humans too much power would upset the galactic balance. Representatives argued about precedent and fairness and security. Meanwhile, messages were flooding in from across the galaxy. News of Jake's survival had spread through official channels and underground networks. Some species were frightened of humanity's capabilities. Others were impressed and wanted to establish relations. The Vacrine Empire's ambassador finally stood to speak. We accept full responsibility for our actions. We will pay reparations to Earth and to Jake Morrison personally. We also support humanity's request for Tier 1 status. This announcement shocked the Council. The Vacrine were proud warriors who rarely admitted defeat or showed deference to other species. Threx continued. We underestimated humanity and paid a terrible price. We would rather have them as allies than enemies. Lisa felt satisfaction, but also caution. Victory in the Council didn't mean safety for humanity. They were still a young species in a galaxy full of dangers. But at least now they would face those dangers with respect instead of dismissal on Krell 9. Jake remained unaware of the political storm his survival had created. He spent his days improving his shelter, hunting with the Skrull pack, and watching the sky for any sign of rescue. He'd been alone for over 50 days and was beginning to accept that he might die on this alien world, but he refused to give in to despair. Every morning he woke up, checked his supplies, maintained his weapons, and planned how to survive another day. This stubborn refusal to accept death was the most human thing about him. The Skrulls had become his family in a way. The pack accepted him as their leader, following his commands and protecting him from the planet's dangers. The young one he'd saved from the bog stayed closest, often sleeping near Jake's shelter entrance. Jake taught them new hunting techniques while they showed him plants and animals he'd missed. It was a partnership built on mutual respect, the kind of cooperation that humans excelled at creating, even with beings from completely different evolutionary paths. When the Galactic Council finally voted, it was nearly unanimous. Humanity received Tier 1 status, full voting rights, and protection under galactic law. The few species who voted against did so out of fear, rather than contempt. Ambassador Lisa immediately transmitted the news to Earth. Celebrations erupted across human colonies and settlements throughout space. Humanity had proven themselves not through war or conquest, but through one man's refusal to die. The Council also ruled that the Vakrine Empire must attempt rescue of Jake Morrison. If he was still alive after 53 days on Krell 9, he deserved to come home. Thrax personally volunteered to lead the rescue mission as a matter of honor. But as the rescue ships prepared to launch, another vessel was already approaching Krell 9. Earth's new deep space ship Valiant had been deployed the moment news of Jake's capture reached home. Captain Greg Hayes and his crew had traveled for weeks at maximum speed. The Valiant wasn't a warship but a rescue and exploration vessel, proof that humanity's first instinct was to save their own rather than seek revenge. When the ship entered orbit around Krell 9, Greg broadcast a message on all frequencies. Jake Morrison. This is Captain Greg Hayes of the Earth vessel Valiant. If you can hear this transmission, we're here to bring you home, deep in the jungle. Jake's salvage communicator crackled to life with the message. He stood frozen in disbelief, unable to process that rescue had finally come. The Skrulls gathered around him. Sensing his sudden emotional shift, Jake activated the communicator with shaking hands. Valiant. This is Jake Morrison. I'm alive, and I have friends with me who need transport on the bridge of the Valiant. The crew erupted in cheers. They'd feared finding only remains after so long. Captain Greg wiped his eyes before responding. We're coming down, Jake. Hold your position and prepare for extraction. The galaxy was about to witness the return of the human who had become a legend, and nothing would ever be the same. Part 5. The Predator's return. The dropship from the Valiant descended through Krell 9's turbulent atmosphere with Captain Greg Hayes personally at the controls. He'd spent weeks imagining what they might find, fearing they would arrive too late. But Jake's voice on the communicator had been strong and clear. When they landed in the clearing, Jake had specified. The rescue team emerged with weapons ready and medical equipment prepared. What they saw made them stop in amazement. Jake Morrison stood at the edge of the jungle looking lean and scarred, but very much alive. Behind him was something unexpected. A pack of six-legged, wolf-like creatures with glowing crystalline eyes. And they weren't attacking. They were flanking Jake like an honor guard protecting their leader, Captain Hayes. Jake said with a tired smile, permission to come aboard. And I'm bringing friends. Greg stared at the Skrulls with wonder. Are those creatures friendly? They saved my life multiple times, Jake replied. And I'm not leaving them to be hunted by the next Vakrine who decides to use this planet for sport. The medical officer rushed forward to examine Jake. She found him dehydrated and malnourished with numerous cuts and bruises, but overall in remarkable condition, considering he'd survived 53 days on a death world. His vitals were strong and his mind was sharp. How did you do it? Greg asked as they walked toward the ship. The reports we received said you defeated over 40 Vakrine warriors. Jake looked back at the jungle that had been his prison and his salvation. I stopped thinking like prey and started thinking like a human. Turns out that makes all the difference. The Skrull pack initially refused to board the ship. They'd never seen anything like it, and their instincts told them to flee. But the young one Jake had saved approached first, trusting him completely. The others followed when they saw their packmate was safe. The xenobiology team on the Valiant was thrilled. First contact with a new species was rare, and the chance to study the Skrulls would advance scientific knowledge significantly. But they also understood these creatures weren't specimens. They were Jake's companions. As the ship lifted off from Krell-9, Jake watched the planet shrink below them. Part of him would always remain there, the part that had learned to survive against impossible odds. But he was ready to leave. The journey back to human space took 3 weeks. During that time, Jake recovered physically, while the crew interviewed him about his experiences. Every detail of his survival was recorded for training purposes, and historical documentation news of his rescue spread across the galaxy faster than the Valiant could travel. Jake Morrison had become a symbol of human resilience. Species that had dismissed humanity were now reassessing their opinions, and those who had been neutral were suddenly interested in establishing relations. The Vacrine Empire sent an official message through diplomatic channels. They offered formal apologies, substantial financial reparations, and a complete overhaul of their classification system for newly encountered species. Commander Threx added a personal note requesting to meet Jake if he was willing. Captain Greg asked Jake if he wanted to respond. What should I tell them? Jake thought about the warriors who had hunted him, about Threx's initial contempt and later fear, about how close he'd come to dying. Tell them I accept their apology. And tell Threx that humans don't hold grudges when people learn from their mistakes. When the Valiant finally approached Earth orbit, they were met by a fleet of ships. Military vessels, media craft, and civilian transports all wanted to see the returning hero. Jake stood on the bridge, watching his homeworld grow larger, and felt emotions he'd suppressed for nearly 3 months. His sister, Kate, was waiting at the landing facility with tears streaming down her face. When Jake emerged from the ship, she ran to him, and they held each other while cameras captured the moment. She'd thought him dead, and the joy of his return was overwhelming. I told you the frontier routes were dangerous, she said between sobs. Jake laughed. You were right. I'm sticking to the core systems from now on. But both of them knew that was probably a lie. Humans were explorers by nature, and Jake wouldn't be able to resist the call of the unknown for long. The Skrull pack adapted to Earth with surprising ease. They were relocated to a protected wildlife preserve in the Rocky Mountains where the terrain reminded them of parts of Krell-9. Jake visited them weekly, and they always greeted him as their pack leader. Earth's government offered Jake medals, speaking engagements, and political positions. He declined most of them, preferring a quieter role, but he did accept a position as chief instructor at the new Frontier Survival Academy. Young humans from across Earth and the colonies came to learn from him. Jake taught them tracking, adaptation, creative problem-solving, and the mental toughness that kept you alive when everything went wrong. His students called him the Apex Instructor, though he insisted on just being called Jake. The Academy's motto came from Jake's own words. Humans don't have claws or armor or natural weapons. What we have is the refusal to give up and the creativity to turn any environment into our ally. 18 months after his rescue, the Galactic Council held a formal ceremony recognizing humanity as a Tier 1 civilization. Ambassador Lisa Crane stood at the podium with Jake beside her as an honored guest. Humanity has proven that advancement isn't measured only by technology or military might, Lisa said to the assembled representatives. It's measured by adaptability, resilience, and the will to survive. These traits have served us for millions of years and will serve us as we explore the galaxy. Jake was asked to speak, and he approached the microphone with reluctance. Public speaking wasn't his strength, but he understood the importance of the moment. I'm not a hero, he said simply. I'm just a human who refused to die. Every person from Earth carries the same capability because it's built into our DNA. We survived ice ages, plagues, predators, and our own mistakes. Space is just another frontier. The council chamber was silent as Jake continued. The Vacrine made a mistake, but they learned from it, and that deserves respect. Humanity wants to explore and learn alongside other species, not conquer them. But we also won't accept being dismissed or underestimated. His words were broadcast across the galaxy, and the response was immediate. Dozens of species reached out to establish formal relations with Earth. Trade agreements were signed, cultural exchanges were arranged, and humanity found itself welcomed into the galactic community as true equals commander. Threx attended the ceremony and approached Jake afterward. The proud Vacrine warrior looked diminished but sincere. I judged your species by appearance rather than capability. It nearly cost me my life, and definitely cost me my honor. Jake extended his hand in the human gesture of reconciliation. You gave me the opportunity to show what humans can do. In a strange way, I should thank you. Threx looked at the offered hand, then clasped it firmly. If humans ever need allies, the Vacrine will remember the lesson you taught us. 5 years passed, and Jake's story became required learning in schools across human space. Children grew up knowing that one man armed with nothing but knowledge and determination had changed humanity's place in the galaxy. Frontier Survival Academy graduated thousands of students who carried Jake's teachings to new colonies and exploration missions. Whenever humans faced hostile environments or dangerous situations, they remembered Jake Morrison on Krell9 and refused to give up. Skrull thrived on Earth and eventually had offspring. Xenobiologists studied them with Jake's permission, learning about their pack behavior and intelligence. Some proposed that Skrulls might eventually be uplifted to sentience, given their capacity for cooperation and learning. Jake never married or settled down completely. He split his time between teaching, visiting the Skrulls, and occasionally consulting on first contact situations. He became the person others called when humans encountered species that might be hostile on the 10th anniversary of his survival. On Krell9, Jake returned to the planet with a scientific expedition. He stood in the clearing where he'd first been abandoned and looked at the memorial marker that had been placed there. The marker read, "On this world, one human proved that humanity belongs among the stars, not as conquerors or victims, but as survivors who will never surrender." Jake touched the marker and smiled. He thought about the scared freight officer who'd been dropped here a decade ago, about the Vacrine hunters who underestimated him, about everything he'd learned during 53 days of survival. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, both known and unknown. Humanity would face challenges and setbacks as they explored, would encounter species both friendly and hostile, would make mistakes and learn from them. But one thing was certain: no species would ever again make the mistake of dismissing humans as weak or insignificant. Jake Morrison had taught the galaxy that humans were survivors, adapters, and when necessary, supreme predators, and that lesson would echo through the stars for generations to come.